Good morning, all of you. Today is the second day of the Science Leadership Workshop, and we are really privileged to have a wonderful speaker with us, Professor Ramakrishna Ramaswamy. Professor Ramakrishna Ramaswamy, popularly known as Ram Ramaswamy, he was the president of Indian Academy of Sciences from 2016 to 2018 and vice president of Indian National Science Academy. And he holds MSc in chemistry from IIT Kanpur and PhD from Princeton University and postdoc from California Institute of Technology, also known as Caltech. So he's a very good profile he has. And he served as Vice Chancellor of the University of Hyderabad, the Central University of Hyderabad from 2011 to 2015. And currently he is working as a professor at Department of Chemistry, IIT Delhi. He has got lots of achievement, including he has served as a sabbatical at Institute of Advanced Studies, where Albert Einstein worked at the Princeton, as well as in Japan. And he's also a prolific writer. He has got a very good blog. It's called And Then Life After. So in his homepage. So I suggest all of you to have a look. And there is another connection with Professor Ramaswamy, which I discovered today, that we developed an app for this this entire program. The app is called Science Leadership Workshop. Science Leadership Workshop. It's available in the Google Play Store. And this app is actually developed by Deepak Das, and he's my student, a student volunteer. Thank you, Deepak, for volunteering for this work. And he collaborated with Donay Pudi Ravita, and he was an earlier student of Professor Ramaswamy. Thank you so much, sir, for coming in our program. And yeah, and I would like to invite Dr. Anindita, Professor Anindita Bhadra. So could you please say a few words before we start the presentation? Anindita herself is a science leader, recently got inducted as a, the co-chair of the prestigious Global Young Academy. Congratulations, Professor Anindita. Anindita is working as a professor and dean of international affairs at IISER Kolkata. Welcome, Anindita.
Thanks, Felix. It's a pleasure to be here and especially to moderate a session for Ram. We seem to have a lot of common interests and we keep meeting in this kind of situations. So it's interesting that just before the lockdown, I was welcoming Ram to another science leadership program, the MHRD sponsored LEAP in IISER Kolkata. And we are back in another one now. And it's a special pleasure because this is being conducted jointly by Ingenious and Punjab Central University of Punjab, and Ingenious is an organization very close to my heart. I've been associated with it since its founding for the last 6 years. So it's a pleasure, and we look forward to Ram's talk.
Yes, Professor Ram, you can start.
I'm unmuted, and let me share my screen. Is that now shared?
Yes, perfect. Go.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Felix and Anindita. And it's a pleasure to be here at this workshop, this academy workshop on leadership in science. And I sort of thought that this is going to be a mostly anecdotal talk. Part of it is going to be really about some of my personal journeys and what is science leadership when you talk in terms of the individual. So the most important thing there is how do you survive as an individual scientist in India, and the institutional, namely how does one lead or how does one provide leadership to institutions, because that is presumably what this workshop is all about. In the institutional area, the two themes that I've chosen to discuss today are teamwork and cooperation, namely how does one develop a community of scientists, a community of scholars. And a very important component of this community development is how to have inclusion and diversity more than what we have already now and more representative of what we have in our country. All right, so let me just start with sort of the personal discussion of how does one encourage personal leadership in science. or in academics more generally. And as Felix has already told you, I did my master's at Kanpur. I did a bachelor's in Loyola College in Chennai, a PhD and a postdoc in the US. And in India, I came back to the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai, where I was for 6 years, 81 to 86. And then I moved to Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi, where I've spent really the bulk of my career. In between, as Felix also mentioned, I was briefly at the University of Hyderabad for a 4-year period. And now I am a visiting professor at IIT Delhi. Right. Now, my own research interests have been very varied. My degrees are in chemistry, in my postdoctoral years, I did chaos theory, and then I moved a little into statistical physics. At JNU, I had a position in physics and also in computational biology. And my interests also include working on women in science and the history of science. And all this will be a little relevant as we come along. All right. The first thing is that, a life of academics and a life of science in particular is a privilege. Uh, Particularly in India, as we are going through this extreme lockdown, we do realize that there is a lot of privilege that many of us have. But beyond and above and beyond that kind of privilege, the way in which the country has sort of encouraged us, allowed us to have a career in science, that is something which is not given to a lot of people. And I think that one shouldn't actually forget that. Now, in this section, what I want to really discuss is how does one survive as a scientist? How does one have a career which is rewarding? And one of these, there are these 10 best, the kind of stuff, mojo.com and all are very good at telling you, 10 rules for doing this or that or the other. So, but here are 10 rules that the computer scientist Hamming pointed out as to how to do your best research. I'm not going to read all these rules out, but I'll just emphasize a few of the important ones, and those of you who are interested can look at it in the slides later on. The first thing that Hamming requests you to do is to drop modesty. Don't get into this, the whole business of being modest about what you want to do or what you can do. And because this will sort of particularly relevant also to India, some of these things are also true in no matter where you're working. What he points out is that you've got to make the best of your working conditions. Nothing is ever going to be ideal. You've got to make the best of your working condition. You need to have courage. It's not just enough to be smart. And you have to work on important problems in your field. Now, you will hear many of these things people will tell you from time to time, but one which people don't always tell you is to leave your door open. That is to listen to people and to talk to them. And I have personally found that to be very useful because it's only by leaving my door open and talking to colleagues, etc., that I was able to meander between chemistry, where I got my degrees, physics, where I found that, I had a teaching position in physics, and computational biology. All this happened because you're able to talk to colleagues. The biologist, the evolutionary biologist, Wilson, E.O. Wilson, he actually had a lot of other, he's got a wonderful book, Advice to a Young Scientist. And one thing that he said, many things that he says are worth thinking about, but we must realize that in an attempt to make scientific discoveries, every problem is an opportunity. The more difficult the problem, the greater will be the importance of its solution. Many of us are not going to be working in areas where, which are flashy or which have got obviously important sounding problems. But regardless of the field in which one is working, I think that we should realize that every problem is, in fact, an opportunity. And it is good if we work on slightly difficult problems, because the more difficult the problem, the more important it is that you solve them. Um, Out of another 10 lists, I'm going to come and finally give you all my own list of 10, but um, things that are important over here in terms of leadership. I think it's extremely important never to ignore people. Far too often, I find that, the more quote unquote important you get, people tend to not look at others or not take others very, very seriously. So it's very important as you continue in science or continue in a career not to ignore people and to do your share for the community. Our country is a poor one. I'm going to come to that also a little later. But it doesn't work if one doesn't do enough for the community. And organizations like Ingenious and and the science academies, etc., give one opportunity for people to participate in a more communal in a more communal uh, process. Because finally, I believe that all of academics and all of research and science and so on, this is a community activity. Particularly when working in a low income country, I think it's very important that we understand our country. It's not enough to talk down to people all the time. It is not enough to treat people like children. I think we need to understand that there's a lot of wisdom, there's a lot of native wisdom in our country. And in particular, regardless of where you're working, it's important that you understand your country. We need to focus on work. And one of the most important things is to develop endurance, because things move very slowly over here. Um, okay. So now I have distilled my 10 rules for how to develop yourself for leadership in science. Namely, how to do your science in a way where you are taken seriously, where you make some reasonable contributions, and you are seen or you can emerge as a science leader at a personal level. The most important thing, as I was saying, you need to understand your country, its social mores, its needs, because if you don't understand this, what are you working for? You need to have courage to make the best of your working conditions. It's easy to complain, but today, in this day and age, we know that in our country we don't have perfect Wi-Fi all over the country, but we have Wi-Fi. We know that we don't have, just excuse me, uh, we don't have all the you know all the best, the latest, this, that, or the other. We know we don't have that, but we have so much more than others, and we need to we make the best of our working conditions. Endurance, I've already talked about. You need to have a lot of patience, and if you want to make anything work, you really do need endurance. Need to work hard and effectively on important problems in our field. I cannot emphasize the importance of leaving your door open. We need to collaborate locally and we need to collaborate internationally. Yesterday, Dr. Khan talked about mentorship. And I think more generally, I'd like to emphasize that it's important to commit ourselves to the education of those younger than us. Um, Not just in terms of teaching, but how does one get the next generation of young scientists to come about? One has to commit oneself uh, to their education, need to publish competitively. Again, don't ignore people. We need to do our share for the community. And most importantly, appreciate being a scientist. In a poor country in particular, a lot of people have put not just their faith, but they've also put a lot of money in us. And so remember that this is a privilege to be a scientist. This is not a recipe for how to become a science leader, but I think that every leader of science in our country, one way or the other, has followed most of these tenets. Whether you were trained abroad and then are working over here, or whether you were trained here and are working over here, all these are principles generally that we believe in, and and they stand us in good stead when we want to develop. Now, in addition to being a science leader in one's own field or in one's own arena, there is also a question of institutional leadership, and that is in part what this workshop is trying to discuss, and in a more wider context. So there are a few different things that one needs when talking about institutional leadership. As it happens, yesterday on Twitter, I saw this rather amusing feed. So it's the 21st of June, so you can see that it's actually quite recent. There's a conundrum. If you get good marks and are doing well in examinations and so on, then say, okay, so the next step is go ahead and do research. Now, if you're going to be good at research, people give you a job and say, well, now teach. And if you're good at teaching and generally good at research and so on and so forth, they say, go manage people, become the head of department, go and become the dean of international affairs or whatever it is that one, and so on in your institution has. And if you turn out to be good at that and at getting grants and at teaching and so on, they promptly say, why don't you become a vice chancellor or a director or something like that? The important part about academic leadership and the way in which it happens, not just in our country, but almost anywhere, is that you rarely get explicit training for the next step. And with each advance, you get less time to do what you were good at. I seem to have repeated that twice over here, but anyway, you get the idea that this is not a job for which one can actually explicitly be trained, more so than what one gets out of workshops like this. Now, when talking about leadership in our country, there are many different kinds of institutions, but most of us, most academics, just in terms of numbers, will get jobs at universities. Whether these are central universities or state universities or specialized science universities like ICERs or specialized technical universities like IITs, most academics do get jobs at universities. And in our country in particular, these are badly neglected. So the workplace is going to be one where there is, poor facilities. Now, in universities, there is a dichotomy, or in academics in India, there's a dichotomy between teaching and research, as if those who teach cannot do research and those who do research cannot teach. Luckily, it's getting to be a little, the difference is lower as time progresses, but it is generally true that people think that research goes on in institutes and teaching goes on at universities. All right. Now, when you talk of leadership in this kind of a context, one has to also remember that the population is increasing, and we need to educate more and more people as the country grows, as time progresses. And what's important over here, in my opinion, is that we need to build groups and departments rather than individuals. At an institutional level, we have to really think in terms of communities. The emphasis is really on training and teaching. Of course, research is important, but the building up of communities is, I think, something that we should be remembering over and above the individual research agenda. Namely, we have to have a clear concept of the greater public good while keeping your own self-interest enlightened, but you keep it in mind, but really emphasize and put your effort for the greater public good. So contribute in ways in which one can, when one can see the community grow rather than just the individual. Because the problems are huge, the numbers of students who are coming into the educational system, and I'm not talking about universities or alone over here. I mean, the numbers are like 100 million. And many of the people who are going to come asking for education are going to be first generation learners. Many of them are going to be from marginalized communities and marginalized groups. And unless we educate these kinds of numbers, we're not going to solve problems, because the solutions of many of our problems also lie in educating everybody. Right? And when talking about leadership today, that is in June 2020, already we have to take into account the pandemic, the COVID, what COVID has done to our society, and what it has, the various things that it has done. It was, somebody pointed out yesterday in one of the talks that, what a wonderful thing, you can reach so many thousands and millions of people with a talk, which you couldn't do in the old days. If I had given a talk, as I did recently at ICER Kolkata, there were maybe 20 people in the audience, and now there'll be a few more because I'm going out over the internet. Now, maybe the pandemic has some lessons for us, because from now onwards, we will all remember these last 4 months. And we don't know how much longer it's going to take, but this is an inerasable memory for us. Uh, have we learned anything? Can we reach out to really large numbers and teach effectively? Can we learn, or can we now start learning how to provide education of some quality? Leaders of the future are going to be those people who realize the opportunities that any kind of adversity gives us and move from there. And the reason I'm bringing it up is that our normal, business as usual methods that we were following in the past was not addressing the numbers that were coming into our educational system. At the same time, I should point out that university administration is not for everybody. It has its own complexities. As I pointed out, we are a poor country, and universities in particular lack resources. And so there's a lot of jockeying around for really small pickings. I cannot emphasize how important it is that our thinking has to be refashioned because of the pandemic. Uh, Anything that one says has to keep awareness of the fact that we have gone through these past 4 months, and we will go through the next 4 months, dealing with something that we have never ever dealt with before, and which will change our value system. It will change the way in which we look at things, and the future in particular. What is strong leadership? Now, leadership itself is an attribute that everybody covets. I mean, everyone wants to be either a VC or a director or some such thing like that. But this appeared in the Mint yesterday by Rajrishi Singhal. It's not enough to be a strong leader. You can give all sorts of illusions about being a strong person. Where does, a strong person who can take a lot of, instantaneous decisions, this is not providing strong leadership. Strong leaders, and, many of us see them, and we are all seeing some, playing out on the stage. Strong leaders are unilateral. They take decisions on their own. They take arbitrary decisions, whimsical decisions, and chaotic, when quoting Rajrishi Singhal, but non-scientific. Basically, they take decisions which are emotional, unilateral, and arbitrary, not based on discussion. In a university setting, they also play on campus politics, they create factions and groups, they thrive on division. Just as those who are not on universities also play politics, create factions and groups, and thrive on division. Strong leadership, and I think many of the talks yesterday tried to articulate this. It has to be inclusive. It has to bring everybody together. It has to have empathy. We've got to realize what the problems that are being faced, because you're not leading in a vacuum. You're leading a group of people, and we need to solve their problems, or to lead them. It's very important to lead by example. I know I'm not wearing a mask, but that's only because I'm inside my office, far from everybody. But in a pandemic environment, I should be wearing a mask. But anyhow, I mean, that example apart, I think it's extremely important to govern by consensus. Not to cover one's tracks or to say that this was a group decision, but a consensus that emerges by discussion is really what strong leadership is all about. In the last part of my talk, let me discuss inclusion. As I mentioned right at the beginning, one of the areas I've been working on is on women in science, on gender issues. But of late, I have been worrying more about general forms of inclusion. So let me just point out that uh, today, women are generally underrepresented in academic science, especially at higher levels of prestige and power. By this, I basically mean that if you look at any system of awards, if you look at any system of power, namely directors and vice chancellors and so on and so forth, uh, women tend to be underrepresented. Not that they are not there, but there are fewer of them. It always calls for some kind of noting that they are there. Uh, Now, this is an interesting question, and it's not just about developing countries. It's true almost uniformly across the world. Again, less as time progresses, but it is generally true. There's a very famous picture of the Solvay conference in the 1920s, where you've got all the greats of physics. You can see Einstein and Max Planck and Hilbert and Schrödinger and Pauli and so on and so forth. And there is only one woman, Marie Curie. So this, of course, that was extreme, and these people are very great, but still the numbers today are better, but not by much. When talking about the women in science, some of the things that we discovered were that, as I've already mentioned, the representation in scientific bodies such as faculties or in science academies is generally low. Women in decision-making positions are few, and persistence is low. And this is called the leaky pipeline. As time progresses, people leave the system and they do not stay. Why? Well, should this be happening? I mean, I think we are wasting a lot of human resource when we allow this to happen, because women and men perform almost identically when given the same opportunities and encouragement. But and the abilities for mathematics or physics, for any subject, the abilities of men and women is virtually indistinguishable. Because these are intellectual activities and not entirely dependent on physical strength. Uh, but stereotypes and the general opinion of parents and teachers, uh, this the stereotypes seriously influence the belief in the competency of women versus men, or one group versus another, at the point of parents and teachers, or more importantly, on oneself. And today, when we are all asked to be Atmanirbhar, I think it's important that Atmanirbharta should also include a self, one should depend on oneself for one's own stereotypes. Okay, this is just in passing. But why is this important? This is important because a stereotype has a very, it can have a bad effect on your actual performance. If you believe that a person from some particular group, whether male or female, or those who speak one language, or those who have one faith, or what have you, uh, are not able to do certain things, then it comes true. I think Ashutosh talked about this yesterday, that there is no reason to believe that participating in any particular group will either give you an advantage or a disadvantage, because uh, many of these things are really about one's own abilities. And more importantly, these stereotypes play a role in policy decisions as well as in personal decisions. So these are important to try to overcome. Um, Now, at the national level, we can all see that it's important from social and economic points of view that the participation of women in science needs to increase. And we need to be able to facilitate the ways in which women can have a career in science. And some policy decisions need to be taken. Uh, we need to have measures not just to attract women to science, but we need to have measures to keep them there. Namely, it should become possible to have a science career. And the usual arguments in this particular context are, is it possible to have a career and family, etc., etc. All this needs to be talked about, and it has to be talked about essentially by leaders, because who is going to facilitate this? It has to come from the top, and this is what leadership is really all about. There are very simple measures which are not difficult to implement. And let me now step outside talking just about gender issues and women, but this holds for all other groups that are underrepresented in academia. Other groups that are underrepresented in academia include groups from socially marginalized communities, uh, people with disabilities, people from other minorities, and so on and so forth. All of these are underrepresented in academia, and it's important that they should be there because we need to break stereotypes. If we don't break stereotypes, we are not going to be able to increase the participation of any particular group, and this is a big challenge for the leadership of the future. I think it's important to remember that you don't need to be a strong person, a strong leader, but you need to provide strong leadership, and this is what leadership actually would mean. Something that I have learned by personal experience and felt for a long time is that directly or indirectly, being inclusive having a large number of different types of people in the group that is doing any particular activity, directly or indirectly, this would improve the quality of science and its social relevance. Reservations and programs to enable re-entry to a scientific career are good, but we have to work towards a kind of society where it's not necessary to have these kinds of tools. We need to make our workplace more inclusive already by having proactive policies that would address common issues. Uh, some of this is easier said than done, but it is important that they are said, because if they are not said, they will not be done. The diversity of an institution, and I do believe this very strongly, the diversity of an institution correlates with its vitality, with the quality of ideas that can come forth, and with its essential character. Gender is one component of such diversity. Academic institutions in general that are committed to ensure and enable participation of hitherto disadvantaged groups at all levels of academics are the richer for it. The classroom becomes richer, the workplace becomes richer, the institution becomes richer. And measures that can be taken to promote this kind of institutional diversity are important, and they should be encouraged. As a corollary, all the policies and attitudes that suppress or reduce such diversity, they seriously need to change. And with that, let me conclude. This is the leadership that we need, whether in science or in administration or in academics. This is the lead. An inclusive leadership that promotes diversity is what we need. I started with this slide of a long and winding road, but this is a journey that is well worth taking. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Professor Ram, you can exit the slideshow window now.
1 second. Let me. Yeah.
No, again, there is on the top, stop sharing.
Done.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So thanks, Ram, for the nice talk. And I hope people are going to take back some very important messages about the need for inclusivity, and not just gender, but all kinds of inclusivity in institutions, the role of the leader in engaging everyone in dialogue and taking people together. And I really like your 10 points, which you spoke about in the beginning. And I think it's very important, especially for young students. I see a lot of young people who are registered for this workshop to really learn endurance, because I think that is like the key thing that we need to learn if you are in academia in India, because in India things work very differently, and especially for people who come back from a Western university after a PhD and join a faculty position, they really learn the hard way sometimes that things don't happen here the way things do in many of the American or European institutions which they have been used to. But things work, and I think that's very important. So that was quite engaging and interesting. So I think we can take a few questions. We have lots of questions from the audience. So I will begin with this question from Ayushi Rahman. She has an interesting question. She's asking, how do you keep believing in your choices, adjusting to the fields that are new to you?
Okay, is it at a general level or at a personal level, Ayushi? This is, I mean, it's an interesting thing, because as you can see, I have moved around from field to field. At a personal level, how I stayed with it is always to remember one ethos that we have is to publish. Without it's not as if I publish a huge amount of papers. I don't. But I do publish a paper or two or three every year. And one tries to be contemporary, namely we work on problems that are of the time, and also to work and to be able to publish in the professional journal of that particular field. When I moved, I didn't move out or into any particular thing, but the first time I actually started doing computational biology seriously was only, what we were working towards was a piece of work which eventually appeared in a leading bioinformatics journal. Uh, until that time, I wasn't going to, sort of invest in it particularly, all right, or to feel that I had made the switch. But once that initial hump was crossed, and it happened, as I would say, by insisting that it's not enough to just discuss problems and topics and so on and so forth, but as a working scientist, I would put the importance of publication as something that one lives by. But that's a personal view. And I feel that, when others are considering moving from one area to another, this is a good yardstick to remember, because it's easy to say that, oh, I'm interested in X, Y, or Z, and then eventually have nothing much to show for it in a public forum, because one's work is, after all, publicly funded. Yeah.
Yeah, hi Ram. It is really wonderful and it's amazing. And I really enjoyed your top 10 point, especially on understanding your country. So we have to actually see that the country's limitations, as well as we have to actually, as a scientist, it's our responsibility to, to address the issues relevant to our own nation, rather than simply following the Western, whatever the other countries are doing. That is, I think, that's one of the main roadblocks of why the science is not progressing. We are simply imitating the others, and also the endurance, and leave your door as well as the mind open for new ideas, and also do not ignore people. I think that's a very, very important point that you said. I really enjoyed your talk, and I have noted down. I will follow back that all those points. It's amazing talk, I tell you. Coming to the questions from the audience. So one question, let me pick. Aniket from Delhi is asking, in India, we have 3 major science academies. All these academies are exclusively for scientists, while no social scientists or psychologists are in. On the other hand, Leopoldina, the German Academy, or Royal Society of London are open for social sciences too. Do you think we should expand the spectrum of Indian academies? And this also includes Ingenious, while its sister international organization, Global Young Academy, where Anindita herself is a co-chair, is open for social science.
Okay. So Aniket, INSA actually has a section now where there are some areas, but it is not all areas outside science. Okay, at some point in time, it may not make much of a difference, but INSA has the section on history of science and on technologies. So they do now occasionally allow people, but you're right. We don't have the kind of broad membership that the Royal Society has. Leopoldina, I don't really know, so I wouldn't like to comment about. But the World Academy of Sciences, or TWAS, they also have a section where they include actually economists, sociologists, historians, and so on. There is a place for it, but let's say that the business of allowing history of science only happened in the last 10 years. So maybe it'll take a little more time, but the point is well made, and maybe Ingenious can show us the way. And I mean this seriously.
I will actually comment on it because Ingenious was mentioned. So because when we started, we are still under INSA. We are kind of an offshoot of INSA. And we kind of follow the similar guidelines based on which INSA membership selection happens. So this is how we have started in the last 5 years. That's how we have progressed. But I would also like to mention that while we were founding Ingenious, this was one of the objectives, that once we have kind of established ourselves, we are eventually going to involve people from other disciplines, because for us, a scientist is somebody who has a scientific temper and not necessarily who works in the areas of natural sciences. So we already have engineering, but we will eventually expand to what is known as social sciences, humanities, arts. So Ram will get back to audience questions. Here's a question from Monua Banerjee.
Yeah.
She's asking, in universities, there too much administrative work diverts attention from research. And also time management is a big issue. So can you suggest how to manage time?
This is, I didn't realize, who's asking this question? Mahua.
This is Manua Banerjee.
Okay. Manua, there is no way out, but a little bit of multitasking has to be done. I mean, it's an unfortunate thing that, that people, they don't share responsibilities. So one of the things that I was talking about is do your bit for the community. I think that it's absolutely important that everybody has to do their bit for the community. And sometimes that takes a little more of one's personal time. So other than being a little efficient about it, um, I don't I don't have any, there is no mantra that one can, stop time from moving onwards. But one of the things that I think one should realize is there's a lot of useless work that is done also. There's a lot of pointless form filling and a lot of unnecessary bureaucracy. And one of the important things about leadership would be to try to minimize that. At JNU, I served as dean of my school, quite some time ago. When I was taking over as dean, my predecessor was sort of telling me that, look, Ram, uh, there's nothing much that you must remember about, how to be a good dean, except that you are doing this job for 2 years, and during this time, you take on the job or you try to reduce the work that others have to do. You take on the responsibilities for this position in a way that you reduce the burden from others. And I found that actually very useful, because if the person who's given the responsibility takes care of it, then others don't have to waste their time doing a lot of meaningless work. All right. It would be wonderful if you could completely stop doing meaningless work, but no system anywhere in the world, and I have lived and worked in various places, everybody has this kind of pointless work that they all do. All right. So I'm sorry, Manua, it is not a very satisfactory answer. But what I'm basically trying to say is that a by discussion, at least try to reduce the amount of pointless work, and b when you have the opportunity, try to reduce the amount of this for others.
Okay, so let me pick one question here from Kalpana Nagpal is asking, what reforms women in science are still waiting and can be achieved in your opinion? And there is a related question by Madhu Tattial is asking about the same question and also your recommendations on policy related issues. So to foster women in science.
See, some things that are actually needed right now, if, from the point of view of women in science, many of these things have happened, but some things that could still happen. This business of dual careers. See, one of the things that many couples face, many women in science are married to men in science, as it happens, and frequently there are two people looking for an academic position, and institutions have either formal or informal rules for not encouraging that. In small institutes and the newer ones, that may be, but in the older institutions in particular, There are almost sort of, encoded policies that don't make it possible for couples to get a job. That's one thing. The second thing is that many institutions have been created in places where there are no facilities. So it becomes very difficult for people to go and get jobs over there if they don't have hospitals, if you don't have good schools, and if you don't have, many of the normal facilities that people take for granted. So as the educational system expands, we need to have a little sensitivity as to how you create facilities around it, because the adverse impact is almost always felt on women, right? Even in the lockdown, we know that there is statistic after statistics from all over the world that the share of homework has fallen unequally on on couples. Women have to do much more of the homework than men do. So these are things that we have to live with. So the point that I'm trying to make is that both institutional as well as extra institutional facilities need to be taken care of if we are going to have a more fair working place for women. The other thing which is important, and this is not yet encoded on all these issues, is a question of age relaxations on certain things. Because, let's face it, women do have to, pay a price, uh, quote unquote price, when it comes to having to defocus from their careers while either starting a family or especially at the young stages of the family. All right. So, to have a fixed age limit for various things sometimes doesn't recognize this reality. All right. And there are many things in our country, and I think people pointed it out yesterday. Bhatnagar Award by age 45 only, or the Young Scientist Award by the age of 32 or 33, or whatever it is. Uh, these are not gender insensitive, so we do need to worry about them. The answer is not to get away with all these awards and stuff, but at least to have a more nuanced approach to it. So these are some of the things that one would talk about. The simpler things that people have talked about in the past, starting, including us, is to make sure that there are toilets everywhere, to make sure there are creches everywhere, to make sure there's daycare facilities, these kinds of things. By and large, most institutions um, it take place. I want to also respond to a question that's coming on Facebook. I think that after the pandemic, we are going to see that there will be a differential effect on men and women. Uh, you know, this is going to be a problem as the money for science dries up, as the amount of facilities and resources for science and education dry up. I think we are going to see that this will affect women unequally, uh, men and women unequally, with the burden being, really taken by women. The number of jobs is likely to go down, in my opinion, and the amount of money for research is also going to go down, and this might land up having an unexpected gender dimension.
Thanks, Ram.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm happy to tell you that in Enrich, we actually have implemented this age relaxation for women. So if people have taken a break or have said that I would like to apply and I'm 41, but I have a child, then that is taken care of and considered to be a valid age limit. We do this in the Global Young Academy, we do this in the INEAS, and I hope other organizations and awards and even there are age bars in some cases for jobs, uh, unwritten age bars, and this is something that is definitely very important for women to be included in the general procedure of competition. So there is a different kind of question coming here from Vinod. He's asking, how do we change the incentive structures in academia that do not support more than publish and perish symptoms? When do we start valuing other interim products, including trainees? And I think there is a related question from Ravi Kumar. He's asking, most of the young faculty's energy get wasted by so-called stereotypic higher officials in the universities. What do you suggest to change this or overcome this? So that's one of them is you.
Look, I think it's very important to keep telling your senior people in this university to occasionally listen to people like me. I mean, get off the backs of younger people and allow them to do work. Now, I think that it is impossible, you must realize that in academics, the field of academics has a certain ethos. If you don't follow that ethos, then you are not true to your calling. It is important to do research. It is important to publish. So I'm not saying that you've got to publish 30 papers a year or 40 or 50 or be crazy about it. But you set a standard and you try to stick to it. I'm just responding in general to this idea. Now, you see the work, trying to get a balance between publishing and doing other kinds of things. The other kinds of things that we do in academics, they are part and parcel of the job. So I have already emphasized how important it is for us to train younger scientists or to train younger people. This is a very important task, and it will get taken care of. It gets taken care of in the way in which you train. Over the years, for example, while I've been at JNU, I have had a very large number of PhD students. I've had a very large number of master's students. It's not as if I'm sitting on their head all the time and coercing them to do something or the other. It's a question of how you take your mentoring activities and how you are able to to impact their ways of thinking and their lives and so on and so forth. So I think that teaching in one form or the other does eventually get rewarded by the system. Now, the awards structure in our country is highly problematic. Now, we are not going to, this discussion is not going to change that. I'm not, particularly fond of it. But one thing that is true in our country is that whatever awards there are few of them. For a country of our size, there are very few of them. Some things need to change, but by and large, people who are awarded deserve the awards. Not everybody who deserves gets the award, but those who get the award almost certainly deserve them. And once you have that recognition, it's important. There are two things that are important. One is to remember that it doesn't, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't mean very much. But in the small scheme of things, it does mean something, and so it's important what you do with it. I believe that anybody who has achieved any level of recognition owes it to the rest of society to do something for society. Again, not a very satisfactory answer, Vinod, but I'm not going to turn around and say stop all awards; these are bad.
Over to
I can see that the next speaker is already there. So, do you want to take a question or do you want to conclude?
Yes, I think we cannot take all the questions. There are lots of them. So let's thank Ram for the very engaging discussion that we had today. And we hope to have you back for some other program, some other time. So thanks for your time, Ram.
No more webinars.
It was a pleasure having you here.
I just wanted to tell Ram that I agree with what he's saying. I think we have some very, very talented scientists who have been recognized. They are thought leaders. And this country needs scientific thought leadership and meritocracy in our scientific ecosystem. And they must play a very, very key role in shaping science and technology for our country. So I completely agree with you. Awards are very important. And I think that recognition also is very important, but then make sure we leverage those recognized scientific thought leaders in a proper way, because they should be given much more responsibilities and opportunities to play a leadership role.
Yeah, but if I can add, Kiran, it's, I think that if you're going to just wait for opportunities to be given, see, these people have awards. What more? They've got a voice already. They've already made it big. So I would put the onus a little more on the awarded.
Yeah, but very often, Ram, our system also does not empower them in the way they should be empowered. Some of them, I would say there are many people like that who have a voice but cannot, speak.
Especially young people.
Yeah.
No, I tend to see a
You
lot
know my
more
crib.
of the awardees who are on to the next award. After they've got one, they're already racking up the points needed for the next one. Anyhow, but anyway, thank you for the point, Kiran, and thank you all for listening to me patiently or impatiently. On Zoom, you can't tell. Right.
Thank you so much, Ram.
Yes.
It was really wonderful, absolutely fabulous presentation on behalf of Central University of Punjab, as well as on behalf of Ingenious and other Science Academy. Thank you so much. And also Professor Anindita Bhadra for chairing this session. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye. Now allow me to share my screen. Hi all. So now we have one of the most awaited by Kiran Mazumdar Shaw. She has been listed as 65th most powerful lady in the world, friends, by Forbes magazine. And she's an Indian billionaire entrepreneur, and net worth is estimated US $3.1 billion. Founder and chairperson of Biocon India Limited, former chairperson of Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, many honorary doctorates from different universities, Othmer Gold Medal for outstanding contributions in progress of science and chemistry. I warmly welcome you, ma'am, on behalf of the Central University of Punjab, as well as on behalf of Ingenious and Science Academies. Welcome to the show. And this session is co-moderated by my friend, Dr. Preeti Kedarpar. Herself is a good aspiring science leader. Over to you, Dr. Preeti. Dr. Preeti here. Would you like to add some words? I think there is some problem. I think I will get back right to Dr. Preeti after her talk now. Over to you, Mrs. Kiran Mazumdar Shaw.
So thank you, Felix, and thank you, Preeti. Basically, you've asked me to share my entrepreneurial journey in the context of science and technology. And as a scientist entrepreneur, let me tell you about why it is so important for a country like ours to leverage science and the marvels of science for really making a difference to society in many, many ways. I started off life as a scientist entrepreneur who got into business very accidentally because I couldn't get a job. I trained to be a fermentation scientist, a brewmaster. I came back to India. I found I couldn't get a job. And then a set of circumstances accidentally got me to becoming an entrepreneur. And I started my entrepreneurial journey in 1978 when I first started developing enzymes and enzyme technologies for replacing chemical technologies. And I felt it was a very exciting thought that we could actually start replacing polluting chemical technologies with eco-friendly enzyme technologies that were basically protein catalysts. And I thought this was very exciting, and it got me started. And you know, those were not the years of environmental sustainability. People didn't even bother about pollution, etc., etc. And everyone was merrily polluting using very, very toxic and polluting chemical technologies. But as an entrepreneur, I was very fascinated with the thought of solving a pollution problem. So the first message I want to give is that science solves problems. Science looks at, you know, nature. Science looks at various aspects of our normal life and living systems, at least in biotechnology and other aspects of you know, our lives, and says, how do we basically make a difference? How do we solve problems? What are the challenges that we currently have which we can solve with science and technology? These are the kind of things that really inspire me to keep looking at doing things in a scientific entrepreneurial way. So problem solving and the curiosity of understanding why these problems happen is what really drives science and technology. And to me, as a biotech entrepreneur, I think the COVID crisis itself has thrown up huge numbers of opportunities and challenges for us to basically address and convert into entrepreneurial opportunities or scientific challenges and scientific opportunities for research and innovation. Now, as a scientist entrepreneur, as I said, I started off my life by saying, how do I create a very eco-friendly environment? How do I develop sustainable solutions? And that's what kept me going for a long time. And I was very, very self-inspired when we would come up with enzyme technologies to replace chemical technologies. And I did this across sectors. Then, having developed a large number of technologies for producing these enzymes and enzyme technologies, I started leveraging those technologies, saying, what else can I do? And that what else can I do question became biopharmaceuticals. And in biopharmaceuticals, I looked at fermentation-based small molecules. I looked at insulin and antibodies. Insulin, why? Because India had a huge challenge of diabetes. And insulin-dependent diabetes was a big challenge for India because we had to import all our insulin. And human insulin was very expensive and beyond the reach of most people. And therefore, we were using animal insulins. And I felt ethically that was wrong. I said, why can't we develop a recombinant human insulin? And since I had technology that I understood, I leveraged it for developing insulins. And of course, I continue to be an insulin company today, which develops all its insulins based on our proprietary Pichia fermentation platform. Then came antibodies, and I realized that antibodies also were a big need for the country and beyond the reach of most patients who needed biologics for their treatment. And so I said, let's develop affordable access to biologics. So I took a twin track. One was novel antibodies and one was biosimilar antibodies. In the novel antibodies, I developed two very interesting antibodies. One was an EGFR targeting antibody for head and neck cancer, because that was a big need for India. And the other was an anti-CD6 antibody, which was a very unique immune modulating antibody for autoimmune diseases. I got that approved for psoriasis. And interestingly, I'm trying to develop that antibody for COVID-19 because it is both anti-inflammatory and cytokine down-regulating. And it's proving to be a very, very effective drug in the treatment of severe and critical, COVID, the COVID disease. We're just completing a clinical trial, and hopefully very shortly I will get label extension from the original use of that drug, which was for psoriasis, to COVID-19. And now I'm going to be doing trials with this drug across the world. So it's a very exciting thought that it's the unmet need, a new challenge that actually throws up opportunities. This to me is at the heart of what science and technology ought to be in any part of the world. In India, for sure, I think in the biosciences, which finally is getting a lot of attention thanks to COVID, where we've used our own capabilities to develop testing kits, whether it is RT-PCR, whether it is serological tests, or whether it is about developing ventilators, whether it is developing other biomedical equipment, whether it is about developing new drugs or treatments. You know, we've now started leveraging science and technology because there is a crisis. And as Winston Churchill says, never waste a crisis, because you can throw up huge opportunities. And I think that's what we're talking about. Today, there is a focus on science and technology. I think when we look at our software sector, we leveraged our computer science skills in a very big way. And now we're trying to now vertically integrate it into innovation as well. So you're seeing a lot of R&D centers being set up in India because we have that capability. And I think we need to make sure that our scientific ecosystem is strengthened. We must make sure that science and scientists in our academic ecosystems also feel excited and inspired. We must drive them towards pursuing greater science. I think we have done a lot of Me Too science for a long time, and I'm also of the view that we really don't have the confidence that we required in our own scientific abilities. I can tell you that I all the time feel that whenever I develop anything innovative in India, there is no recognition for that. Even my new drug, which I'm trying for COVID, has been around for 6 years, but there is no recognition or buy-in from the medical community because they want that endorsement from the US or Europe, mostly US. And because they have been so entrenched in a global ecosystem that wants a constant endorsement from the US or the West, they are not willing to believe in their own science. This has to change. Unless we believe in our own science, unless we have the strength of conviction that our science is good, I don't think things are going to change. So no matter what we say about creativity, innovation, and all the things that we're talking about, unless we believe and improve our science and our scientific creativity, I don't think we will really move the needle. That is what I really wanted to talk about, because I really believe we have great scientists, we have good scientific orientation, we have scientific purpose, but we must start believing in our science. We have too much of a colonial hangover, if I may say so, because we somehow don't believe that we are good enough. And we are. I mean, look at the kind of scientists we produce, look at the kind of Nobel laureates we produce. And a lot of them have had their origins in our science, academic systems. So why is it that we still doubt our scientific excellence and our scientific abilities? And why do we constantly want endorsement and recognition from outside? Look at the countries that have actually started believing in their own science. Look at how well they position themselves. You know, UK has always been at the heart of science and technology. They have a lot of self-confidence. I think US is a younger country, a younger nation, but their whole scientific ecosystem has been very well developed. And they've done it very interestingly because there's so much trust between the private and the public sector. Here, that's another problem. There is so much, there's such a trust deficit between our academic, scientific, ecosystem and our private research ecosystem. That, deficit must be bridged. Because we need to work together. We need to make sure that we combine our resources to make our scientific ecosystem even greater. And I think that's really what I am hoping for, because, you know, this whole notion from the public sector thinking that, you know, private sector is bad because they want to profit from science. I think that has to go, because, you know, we must understand that it is about value creation. Putting science to work is value creation, and we should not mistrust that. We should not feel embarrassed or ashamed of that. Putting science to work is at the heart of what we should be doing for a country like India, and that scientific purpose is something that will really build our economy and build our nation into a very empowered and enabled country because of science and technology. So I think that's where I want to sort of end my comments. And I would love to take questions, because that's a much better way of, sharing my thoughts and my journey. So Preeti, it's over to you. And Felix, it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. And I think Preeti's, we are expecting Preeti. There is some problem with Preeti. I'm not sure. So if Preeti, can you hear me? Over to Dr. Preeti. So anyway, we will wait for her. So I will, let me also introduce my co-host, Dr. Upasana Ray. Upasana is a scientist at CSIR, Indian Institute of Chemical Biology. She herself is a science leader, and she has been doing a wonderful job during this COVID-19 lockdown, and she has been publishing a fantastic paper. And Madam Kiran, you yourself has shared her story, I guess, right, Upasana? Am I right? A tweet?
For that, actually. Yeah, I'm going to thank you for that again.
Yeah, over to you, yes.
Yeah, so I take this opportunity to thank you profoundly for your very enlightening and informative talk. And personally, as a young woman researcher who aspires to be a leader, your words will help me a lot, actually, now. I'm in fact following you and your achievements since my PhD training time during a few years back at IISc Bangalore. And before we start taking up the audience questions, I would again like to take this opportunity to thank you so much for sharing and appreciating one of our recent collaborative articles in ACS Chemical Neuroscience from CSIR IICB with Dr. Tripathi and Dr. Srivastava. So thank you so much. And now we move on to the audience questions. So Felix, you would like to start, or I'll start?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So let me take up this question that this is from Shubhadip Haldar. And so the question is, there are fixed ages for awards such as Young Scientist Award, INSA, CSIR, etc. Young scientist finds he or she is not able to apply for award because of time constraints. Can this system be changed?
Well, you know, I think systems can always be changed. I think you need to basically encourage good work, and any good work will always be appreciated at the right time. Don't chase awards is my question, is my advice. Just, you know, focus on producing good work. Believe me, awards will come to you at the right time without having to pursue it. I think you're absolutely right. Young scientists do need to have a platform for recognition. And I think we need to go beyond awards for this recognition. I think publishing in a way that gets recognition is extremely important. So I would tell young scientists, look, whatever you're doing, try and focus on publishing a great piece of work. And that great piece of work, even whether you are applying or not able to apply for an award, will somehow get you recognition, because people do look for great publications and great work. And I think you will find your place in the academic world through good publication. Don't chase awards. Awards will chase you, believe me.
Okay, so I would like to take a question here from Tejaswini from Hyderabad. She's asking, most of the people working in academia are risk averse, a major roadblock preventing transformation towards entrepreneurship. Do you have any tips to Indian academia to make risk tolerant? Yes.
See, first and foremost, science has inherent risk. And if you're a scientist, you have to take a risk. Today, if you're asking a problem, if you're a scientist, you will want to actually take high risk. So it makes you a natural entrepreneur because you're trying to ask questions, you're trying to query something, you're trying to solve a problem, you're asking, why isn't it like this, or why is it like this? So you need to basically, if you want to understand and pursue a scientific question, you have to be able to take that risk of coming up with answers that you may not have known about, right? So scientists are risk takers. And to me, scientists, therefore, if you are really driven by that purpose of science, then I think you will be a natural entrepreneur if you can really take an idea and run with it and solve that idea and take it and put it to work.
Okay, so now that Preeti is on, and Preeti is one of your, Kiran, Preeti is one of your big fan, and she has been saying a lot about you before we had a talk. And she is, of course, she is a young leader, science leader, and she's also teaching the intellectual property rights in our university. Over to Dr. Preeti.
Thank you, Dr. Felix. I hope I'm audible now. I'm so sorry, there was some technical glitch. Ma'am, you are actually really inspiring personality, and we had learned a lot of you. And I would like to pick up this next question, which is actually somewhere, somehow it is related to your personal as well as professional journey also. Kalavati Acharya, she wants to know why biotechnology students have less opportunity in India, even though this field is very important to find solutions for some various diseases like pandemic, as compared to other fields such as engineering. And we know that, I mean, we have discussed so many times with our students, our PG students and scholars about Kiran ma'am, and how she started her journey from a home garage and then turned into a successful entrepreneur, women entrepreneur, and you had really fought all the odds. So please throw some light on this.
Well, you know, this is now a huge opportunity for biosciences. Let's face it. Yes, I agree. For a long time, we were eclipsed by, you know, IT and engineering and that particular sector. But today, the whole life sciences sector has suddenly been on the, has the spotlight on it. And today, if people are going to say that, oh, is there an opportunity or not an opportunity? I think it's sad. I think, you know, young people must create those opportunities themselves. We can't wait for opportunities to be created for us. Please understand that. I never waited for an opportunity to be created for me. I looked at opportunities, I figured out those opportunities, and I went for those opportunities. And I think every young person must create their own opportunities. This is not about a time for saying, where are the jobs? Please create those jobs for me. Where can I look for a job? That's not the way to look at life. I think young people, if you are in science and technology, it is mandatory for you to have that spirit of curiosity, the spirit of purpose, and the spirit with which you make your jobs, you create your jobs, you push yourself, and you will find that job. I said, you cannot just say, oh, I'm going to pursue one course in biotechnology and I better get a job. That's not the way to look at life. If you're excited with biotechnology, if you really think biotech is a fantastic sector and a subject, which I did, you'll find your job. But I think the problem we have is that people want to just do things just to get a job. That's not the way life is. Life is about looking and aspiring and finding and creating your own job.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Felix, next question. Would you like to take?
Fasana, please. Dr. Fasana.
All right. So
Yeah.
I would just like to add into it that like most of the people know that the Kiran man started his journey by making some manufacturing some enzyme which she was not getting. So it's like you get opportunities and ideas when you face the problem. Instead of waiting for the supply, she herself started with. So Dr. Felix, would you like to ask next question, please?
Oh, I'm just asking Dr. Upasana, you need to unmute and you can ask the question now.
Yeah, so thanks, Felix. We have one question here from Anjana Arigia. So the question goes like this: what are the challenges you faced in your journey till here? This is an obvious question everybody is going to ask you. So as to attend this big recognizable platform, basically now whatever you are, how did you
So
reach?
I think, obviously I underwent a huge number of credibility challenges when I started my company. I mean, you heard that I started in my garage. That itself was a big handicap for me because people never took me seriously. When I was trying to hire people, they would come to my garage and say, what kind of a company is this? What kind of a office is this? They would look at me and they would think I'm the secretary. And I would say, no, I'm the founder of the company. And they would say, oh, then we don't want to work for you. Because they didn't think a woman would give job security. So I couldn't find people to work for me. Banks didn't want to lend me because I was a 25-year-old inexperienced young girl who wanted to start a strange business which they didn't understand called biotechnology. I had no collateral security to offer them. And so they said, no, without that kind of security, how can we finance you? This is high risk in every way. You don't even have business experience. Nobody is behind you. At least if you've got a rich father or a rich partner or something, we can help you. But I didn't have that either. So, it was a very difficult time. I really started in a very frugal way. I want people to know that. You can start like that. Don't think everything has to be tailor-made and everything has to be provided for you. If you're excited with what you're doing, you will enjoy that frugality. Because every time you achieve something, you feel very confident. My life has been about that. My life has been about proving credibility by doing something, by succeeding. So every step of the way, I couldn't get finance, but I kept on trying until one banker felt sorry for me and said, okay, come on, I'll help you. I couldn't get anybody to work for me. I got 2 retired tractor mechanics to at least start with me. Okay, they needed money, so they came and worked for me initially. Then I started interacting with a lot of young scientists in IITs. They also then got very excited with what I was doing. So they were my first true professional hires, even though they had no experience, but still they came and worked for me. Some of them actually were working for other companies. They got very excited with what I was doing. Then finally they came and worked for me. Now, it's very interesting. My leadership team, when I look at it, 90% of them were people who had never worked for another company. They only worked for Biocon, and many of them actually retired with Biocon. Okay, so that also is something which I've been used to because we believed so much in the company. You must have a team. You must have a team of people who work with you to build the company. And I think all of us were driven by biotech, science and technology, innovation. We dared to dream. We dared to take a risk. And we were not frightened to fail. You understand? So those are the kind of lessons that I learned in my life. And of course, it didn't worry me. People were very prejudiced about and biased against women entrepreneurs. They said, oh, she's a woman. She will never be able to do this. She will never be able to take a risk. It's a very risky thing to invest in women entrepreneurs because they don't know how to run businesses. How will she manage? These were the kind of questions I had to field, right? But it didn't worry me. Because I think ultimately I feel if you have a sense of purpose, you have a spirit of challenge, don't listen to all these negative voices. There are people who believe in you. For the same number of people who kept criticizing me, I had an equal number who believed in me. My biggest mentor in my life has been Mr. Baghul of ICICI. He believed in me so much. Because I would go and brainstorm with him saying, look, this is what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do. This is what people are telling me. He's the one that told me, don't listen to such negative voices. Go to people who actually buy what your story is and people who are willing to invest in you. Those are the kind of people who are good for you. Don't listen to negative voices. And he was the one who invested in me. When I told him I'm not getting funding for scaling up my homegrown technology, he said, oh, I've just started a fund for investing in such things. You are ideal. And he said, forget about getting a loan, I'll invest in this business. And of course, they did very well out of that investment. So, you know, slowly I built myself up by having self-belief. And that self-belief is very important.
Okay, so I'll question from Varun from asking, congratulations for great philanthropic initiative in education and health sector. I'm proud of you to be a great and responsible daughter of India. Are you planning to support science communication sector? INEAS is working towards science communication at grassroots level of the country, so as many state and central universities and institutes. Any comments?
So my main, effort is to really support science and education through higher learning. That has been my biggest, interest. So I just feel that a lot of young scientists have very good potential. And if I can actually help them through scholarships and through higher education and by building a higher educational ecosystem. So I'm really helping in that kind of an effort. Now, you know, I have to look at various other opportunities. Whether I will do this or that will all depend on how it will help my thinking in terms of, providing this kind of scientific excellence approach to scientists. So that's the way I'm doing it. Like, for instance, I am still supporting a very big program at MIT, at Koch Institute, called the Mazumdar Onco Fellowship Program. And in that, I have actually supported a large number of students of Indian origin. Many of them have come back to India and started their own labs here, which I think is very important. And because of that connect that they have with an institute like MIT, which is an amazing multidisciplinary, engineering college, I think it's very important for our, young scientists to get that kind of connect. So I'm really happy that one of them has come back and started a bioengineering lab at IISc. Another one whom I supported actually won the Innovation Prize of the Year in America. So things like that, I think it's very important to do this. I'm also supporting a clinical fellowship program at Sloan Kettering for Indian clinical students. I'm also supporting, of course, a large number of scholarships in India, whether it is at the IISc or the National Center for Biological Sciences or the Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Advanced Scientific Research, and many other such scholarships, because I want people to really focus on higher scientific learning and research, of course.
Thank you, ma'am. So the next question comes from Ashish Tapiyal. So he wants to know, why is that there are more job opportunities for engineers in comparison to a biologist? So what is your...
That's not true. I just answered that question. It's in your mind. It's in your mind that you feel there are more opportunities for engineers than bioscientists. I think today you will understand there's a huge opportunity for bioscientists which you've never thought of. And I think industry has ignored the power of bioscience. Today, I think there's going to be a lot of focus on that.
Yes, Dr. Ubasna, would you like to make some comments?
Yeah, so this is a question from Bhavatosh Tikani, and is asking that how can we enrich a collaborative environment between industry and academia in India? This is a very common question that we come across all the time. Would you like to say something?
See, first and foremost, I think there should be a mutual trust between the two sectors. Okay, one should not feel beholden to another sector. So there has to be an equal partnership when it comes to this. I've also there is actually now an initiative going on to see how we can actually create this industry academia partnership. Some of it can come through grants which actually necessitate that you must have an academic partner. This has been thought of in the past, but I think today you need a program where you almost start inviting industry to have a lab in the academic center. You must also have, a sort of resident positions in industry for academic researchers, things like that. I think you need to really build that trust through a lot of that research respect, mutual research respect that you have for each other, and know that together we can win and make it into a very, very successful ecosystem.
Preeti?
Okay.
Dr.
So,
Preeti?
thank you. Next question comes from Aarti Goyal. I think she is taking up the point that almost all the young people face, like how to make the reviewers of journal, even of the projects also, that our work, our proposed work will actually work. So because yes, we know that most of the research
Hello?
projects and
Discussed.
review papers, they're published. Yeah.
All right.
Please, ma'am.
Okay.
So I personally believe that there are two types of research which are equally important. There is basic research which needs to go on, and then there is applied research, which is really a hypothesis, based on hypothesis. You basically look at something and you believe that this might work, right? And until you experiment with it, obviously there has to be some scientific rationale, some kind of deep thinking behind why it will work. So those are the kind of discussions you need to have with with a group of people who are knowledgeable. And maybe when you create those kind of groups within academia, you need to bring in people who are entrepreneurial. It's not just about an industry person, but it's good to bring in entrepreneurs who think like that, so that when scientists come up with proposals, entrepreneurs can also look at that saying, hey, let's give it a chance because it could work. Very often you might have a cut and dried yes and no from people who are too, looking at it with very sort of myopic eyes, saying, oh, this can never work or this can work. So I think you need to have a group of people looking at proposals where you actually bring in people who are entrepreneurial and who are from of course the particular field. And I think this has been experimented upon at BIRAC, which is the DBT investment arm, which does it very well. They actually bring in people from industry along with the academic people to look at any proposal and see how good is it.
That's true. Very true. Dr. Felix?
Yeah, so I think we are now coming to the end of this entire session. We have already outshooted by, I can see that now it's 12:38, 8 minutes over. Thank you so much, ma'am, from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of Central University of Punjab and Ingenious and 3 science academies of the country, and really, really humbled to have you accepted our invitation. Dr. Basna, would you like to make any comment? And Dr. Preeti?
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. It was really an honor for us. And I think there are thousands of participants who are enlightened and who are encouraged now to look the biotechnology as entrepreneurship rather than just focusing on job prospects. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Invite one more person here. Dr. Shobhana Sharma is the Professor Sharma. Would you like to add some points? In case you would like to. Yeah, anyway, it is not in the protocol, but still I could see that she's online from TIFR. And Professor Sharma is now going to talk. It's coming up. Her talk is on the way now. Thank you so much, ma'am, once again for the opportunity. For being part of this program now. Now, our next talk is at 3:30, so please be online. So 3:30 post lunch. So enjoy your lunch. Goodbye to all.